Hi, this is Isabel Florence, and you are listening to You Are Light podcast, a safe space where we talk about mental health and well-being. Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back. Today, we have an incredibly insightful conversation with a pioneer in trauma-informed care, Stephan Friedrich. Stephan is the founder and CEO of Knightlamp Consulting and a child trauma specialist with a profound commitment to helping children and young people impacted by severe adversity. His work integrates cutting-edge knowledge from neurobiology, attachment theory, and psychodynamic principles to create practical strategies for caregivers, educators, and professionals. This episode is so important for teachers, carers, parents, and anyone who wants to understand how to genuinely support someone dealing with complex trauma. I have learned a lot, and I hope you do too. Enjoy! Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
I would love to start talking about you and your journey towards the work that you do. Please explain as well to the listeners what it is that you do.
I have a company called Knightlamp Consulting and Psychology. So I have a team of great people with me, and we do a whole lot of things in the psychology field and in the helping field. Our area of focus is working with the impact of early childhood trauma, how that impacts on the child as they grow up, and sometimes on the adult as well, through the life trajectory, I guess. So most of our work is supporting people who have children in care who have a substantial amount of trauma in their history. This might be organisations that provide foster care service and residential care services, but also we work with schools and some communities that are affected and other people who do helping work like we do. So I often will work directly with children, with their families, with their foster carers. And sometimes, some of the work is also, I guess, more on the political end of things, as policy really tends to dictate a lot of what happens in these children's lives, if that makes sense. So,
Right, yeah. So I definitely want to talk about what you do and ask the questions that I think most people will have, like defining trauma and the consequences of trauma in a development stage of a child. But I first would like to understand, what is it that took you towards that work, the passion behind the work that you do now?
I think we all have like little nodal points in our lives that take us a certain way, don't we?
Yeah.
If I was going to be really honest with myself, and I guess I haven't answered it in this way before, but I will, because you're bringing that out of me somehow. I remember my dream was to work in a lab somewhere with chemicals.
Right.
That's what I wanted to do. At school, I was really fascinated by the sciences, and my childhood was a really very blessed one, if I can put it that way. I had wonderful parents and a wonderful family. I think it's all this perfection around our family life, and my life really changed when I was around 16 years old, and my younger sister became ill, and uh, and we lost her.
Hmm.
And I think that time, it wasn't just losing her, but it was uh, everything, all the conversations that we had together, that the connection my sister and I had together.
Yeah.
She had this kind of real spiritual outlook uh, on life. And following that, as a family, we were devastated, of course, to have lost her. And I tried to look for a way to anchor myself as my parents were grieving. Everyone seemed lost. You have this wonderful family and everyone seemed lost. And I met a lovely older woman by the name of Mary Newton, who just had a real calmness about her. And she assisted me a lot. So as a 16-year-old, I would travel to see my friend Mary on a Saturday, and it would take me a couple of hours on trains and buses.
Wow.
She would lead me through a meditation and would teach me these ways of just being still and calm.
Mm.
And she had this helping thing where she would help people all the time, and I started helping her to help people. She was telling me that to help others was also an avenue to healing yourself.
Yeah.
So I guess in my grief, I was learning this. It so happened that only about a month or two after my sister had passed away, that I was riding my bicycle home from school. And ahead of me was another young girl who was riding her bicycle home, and I didn't know her. A car I heard behind me came roaring up behind me, very close and fast, and I got out of the way, and I swear it touched me, but it and there came another moment in my life of holding this girl while I shouted out to someone to call an ambulance. This girl, it so happened, was in my sister's class at school, same age, and they had known each other. I held her and the ambulance took her away, and I found out the next day that she had passed away in the ambulance. It was a hit and run kind of situation with this car.
Mm.
I didn't know what to do with that, and I couldn't talk to my parents about it because they were grieving themselves. And
Yeah.
I remember holding it in and not knowing what to do. I think I had spoken to Mary about it, and I don't know what came from that conversation, but I felt better. But something about it made me want to find out who her parents were. And I found her parents. I came to their door and I told them that I was the last person with her. And I visited them every week. I don't know what I was doing. I would go there, I would talk to them in the same way that
Mm.
Mary spoke to me, you see. So I was saying the same things that she was saying to me to help me, I was saying to them. And something about that helped me. And I think that, you know, as my family found out and my friends found out that I was seeing these people, you know, they praised me and talked about how good I was, that I had a good heart to go and help them. But I really was going there to help myself.
Yeah.
And I saw them for maybe a year or two. And it really did help me. I haven't told this story before like this. Just when you asked me that, it's like, what happened? I think I then kept seeking my own healing.
Through healing others.
Yes, yes, in supporting others. So it looks selfless, but it's actually quite the opposite, isn't it? So I guess after that, you know, I dropped my aspirations for chemistry and I wanted to learn more about people. So that led me to studying psychology and then drama and drama therapy
Mm.
and a whole lot of things. I picked up a job working in a prison with men older than I was when I was very young, and I worked with these men for a few years. What I realized in these men was that their stories were very similar. I didn't know what to do with that, but as I continued my career, I went into working in juvenile justice, working with boys who had been incarcerated. I saw a younger version of these men. I saw their stories. I met their parents. I worked with other children later. And in all this time, especially working with behavior, you know, and then, you know, managing a remand program, I realized I think that we were doing it all wrong. And I wasn't quite sure why we were doing it all wrong. So around 2007, I was looking for something new because I didn't feel like I was actually helping. I was going there for the job, to be honest.
Yeah.
And around that time, there was a whole lot of knowledge that was emerging in the field of developmental trauma that illuminated a whole lot of things. It made me look back on the work I was doing with young people and realizing why the things that I was doing that were not working were actually not working,
Yeah.
and why the things that were working were working. So this was the work of Bruce Perry, of Bessel van der Kolk, Daniel Hughes and Sandra Bloom. There was a whole lot of work that was coming from all over the world. And at that time, I decided to just jump into that. And this is where I met my mentor, Adela Holmes, who brought trauma-informed therapeutic care really, truly into Australian care. And there we started seeing results. So it was applying the knowledge we had about how trauma impacts a person very early in life.
Yeah.
In a way, I was traumatized with grief, but not developmentally. I had already been cared for and safe all my life.
You had a safe upbringing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was able to make use of it and make use of the advice that I was getting from Mary and from other good people.
It always takes it back to the fact that it's most of the times not the individual's fault, the challenges that they have with their behavior later in life, but actually the experiences that they have as a child where they don't feel safe and they're in an experience of danger and they go through trauma. They don't have the support that you had when you were a kid from your parents and from Mary. And instead of taking a path of healing themselves and healing others through that work, it takes them on the other path, unfortunately, where they are having behaviors that are reflecting the trauma.
Not only does it reflect the trauma, it is driven by the trauma.
Right.
So the neurobiological perspective on this is that the earlier the trauma is experienced and the more pervasive it is, the more it impacts on the architecture of your brain, the way that it functions. Now, it sounds like a life sentence, but it isn't. And I have seen people heal from this. It's a long process, and if done right, people can heal and reshape their brains.
Yeah.
And reshape the way that they see themselves and the world. When people look at the behavior that arises from trauma, sometimes the behavior is really bad. Let's just say, in an extreme point, the behavior is so bad that it hurts other people. It's difficult because when you try and explain to people the reasons for it, they say, well, there's no excuse for that behavior, but there is a difference. We can hold a person to account whilst also understanding why it's there, because it's only when you understand why it's there that something can be done.
Right.
And it's actually no different to physical trauma. Physical, developmental, and psychological trauma all happen in very similar ways and all manifest in very similar ways. They all have an impact on our behavior and on our functioning.
But physical is very clear. We can see what is happening. We
Yes,
understand.
yes, yes, that's right. If you sprain your ankle, which is a kind of physical trauma, so something's ruptured in there, it impacts on your functioning because you can't put weight on it. And you shouldn't put weight on it for it to heal. But as you try and walk, you're a little bit tentative on that foot and it makes you limp. So what other people see is the limping, that's the person's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
If you're limping as a result of a trauma to your ankle, none of the traditional approaches to behavior are going to work to fix the limping.
Yes, I heard your story about your eye.
Well, this was an example of behavior that I put to a group of people who were caring for kids with very challenging behaviors as a result of trauma. So first I asked them, I said, how would you advise me if I had a young man come to me for help? And every time he came to me, I made him a cup of coffee, and he loves coffee. And he appreciated it and he drank his coffee. And halfway through drinking the coffee, quite often, he'd smash the cup on the floor. Coffee would go everywhere and the cup would be broken. How would you advise me? How will I reduce this cup smashing behavior? Members of the group would say to me, well, that's easy. No more coffee for him.
Which is in a way a form of punishment, right? For the behavior.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Or you say to him, you give him an incentive. You say, if you can drink the whole cup of coffee, you'll get cake too. And then you've got the people who will employ some harm minimization techniques and will say, well, give him a plastic cup and drink
Mm-hmm.
somewhere, won't make too much of a mess. None of it actually addresses it because nobody actually asks, why is this happening?
Why?
I have this like curious kind of approach. What happens when we don't like someone's behavior? is it impacts on the language that we use about it to others. So I said the young man smashes the cup because I don't like it. So I'm using this emotive language that makes it sound like more because people spoke about, well, maybe address his anger.
Right, it's from your perspective,
Yeah, how do you know he's angry?
possibly not the reality.
Yeah, yeah. In reality, the person breaking the cups was me. At the time, I was competing a lot in professional mixed martial arts. Just hear the story out before you judge me on fighting. It was just my sport. So I had a fight that I lost. I got hurt in this particular fight because I shattered my orbital bone in the eye socket here. It was a very well-placed knee, beautifully timed. It was broken. It was unfixable. And I now have a titanium orbital bone in there. You got a bit Terminator.
Nice.
Um, when you're healing from this procedure, at first you wear an eye patch, but after a while you have to take this eye patch off. And what happens is you see double
Right.
for a couple of months. The ophthalmologist will give you some exercises to do to try and fix your eye. And, if you're drinking a cup of coffee, you see two of them.
Yeah.
You see two right hands and right arms, and you see two edges of the table. Usually you get it right, but once in a while, you're going to put the wrong cup on the wrong edge,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or the right cup
Or
on the
the
wrong
real
edge,
cup on the wrong
right?
edge.
Yeah. And then you end up breaking the cup. So this happened to me a few times. And then if I say to the group that I was working with at the time that this was actually the cause of it in this young man, how will you now manage and reduce the cup smashing behavior? And it becomes really simple. Like, of course, if you understand it, there's all sorts of ideas. They say, oh, just tell him to shut one eye before putting the cup down. That manages the behavior and reduces the harm to the cup. But ultimately, what fixes it is all the therapeutic stuff that I'm doing when I'm not drinking coffee.
The exercises that you were given by your doctor.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the eye story. And it's to draw an analogy. It is a bit more obvious when it's physical trauma, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because developmental trauma is quite invisible. So you have to learn to see it.
How do you recognize developmental trauma?
You can make some informed guesses at first. There's usually a story there. First, being a little curious, to use your terms.
Yeah.
If I see lots of very reactive behavior, this person looks like, or it could be a child or a young person or an adult, looks like they're overreacting to everything and sometimes to a destructive point.
Mm-hmm.
That gives me the first indication. And they're usually diagnosed with something like ADHD, but it won't be a classic type of ADHD because it'll have all this other stuff attached to it.
Yeah.
You wake up in the morning and your child's got spots all over their face. So you take your child to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, clearly your child has SFD, spotty face disorder. And you still don't know if it's acne or chickenpox. What do I do?
Yeah.
So, look, sometimes ADHD and other of these diagnostic acronyms are a little bit like that.
So the symptom of the issue underneath it.
Yeah. When you see that very reactive person, then I ask how they sleep. Not too well. Are they worse towards the end of the day? Yes. They can sort of hold it together a little bit in some cases. They seem to do really well once in a while in education, and most of the time not. Are they just pretending to not be smart? They say to me. And I
Mm.
go, okay, let's put all of this together. This looks to me like a very elevated arousal baseline. And an elevated arousal baseline means you've got too much cortisol and your heart rate is too high when you shouldn't have. And one of the causes of that is trauma that begins very early, either in utero or close to birth, even the first 6 months of life. If that is a very traumatic environment, then usually the result is, so we can work backwards and say what went on there.
Yeah.
And so, there are other signs. There are relational things where you see them not being able to tolerate being cared for. That is part of the relational harm that we see, and we look to some existing old theory frameworks that tell us a lot about trauma. Things like, Bowlby's attachment theory, Erickson's psychosocial development. There's a lot in that already that before we knew about developmental trauma, which was kind of already present. So, lots of signs that I see in behavior that tell me something, at least give me some questions to ask. And then we need to ask the questions
Yeah.
because otherwise we might be taking an approach which feels intuitive, but actually is not working. And sometimes can be even more harmful.
So when you then define it and you understand that it is development trauma, what would you say are then the ways to deal with it if you're a carer, if you are a teacher, if you are someone working in the community, or even a parent?
One thing that the research has shown us, and there is a ton of really good, rigorous literature out there that will support this, it will probably be insufficient to take them along to a therapist once a week.
Yeah.
Not going to cut it because someone who's developmentally traumatized, who has a sense chronically of feeling unsafe,
Hmm.
untrusting of people, hyper vigilant, and you're asking them to see someone they don't know and to sit still and to think. It's very hard to think when you're under threat.
Yeah.
Try to work out your taxes at the end of financial year while your fingers jammed in the door. It's not possible, right?
I mean, part of the brain actually stops working in a way, right? When you feel like you are in danger.
Well, it actually does because when we're under threat, the body's making itself more efficient.
Hmm.
Want efficient use of the glucose in your blood to use as fuel. You don't want all of that glucose to be going to your cortex, where thinking's going to slow you down and it's going to burn it all up. You don't want it all to go to digestion
Hmm.
because you're not going to make any use of those nutrients till tomorrow. You lose a lot of access to your neocortex, to a lot of your limbic system. So there's your emotional control,
Yeah.
your high level executive cognition. This is why we become very selfish when we're in pain.
Yeah.
If you've got a really bad toothache, you're not thinking about people less fortunate than you during that time.
No.
It's selfish, but that's how we are. So going back to this example, what do we do with teachers and parents and carers? The first thing that we do is we realize that the adults who are objectively safe, even if they may not feel safe to the child. The adults who are safe, we can help them to feel safer, right? Who are already in their lives. Those are the people who can do more therapeutic work than any therapist.
Right. So instead of putting the
Yes.
work onto someone else and saying, please deal with the student, my child, whoever, it's understanding how to deal with the behaviors yourself.
Yeah, correct. So I just spent the afternoon with some foster carers and a child exhibiting some pretty extreme behaviors.
Mm.
Most of my energy is going to the carer. I'm there to get to know the child so I know how to advise them, right?
Yeah.
In a way, I'm using them as the therapist proxy because they're going to be able to achieve more for longer periods of time throughout the whole day and night, 24/7, through their responses. What I've become really desperate to do is to put this knowledge that's really helped me a lot into terms and into ways that non-academics can put into practice and can understand. That's what I feel like is my mission, because I feel like I'm doing more work that way.
Yes, because the more people know, the more kids will feel safe, feel held, and start the healing process.
Yes, yes, exactly.
It's beautiful, beautiful work. So, for example, if a kid is experiencing high emotions and anger and they are very clearly destructive in their environment, how do you start the work with that kid?
The one you described is a little boy that I saw today. People are dealing with his anger and his aggression, but it's actually not about anger management and it's not about aggression, really, right?
Mm,
That's the aggression and anger is the end user, really.
yeah.
He's had a very traumatizing beginning to life from in utero. The arousal baseline is so high that the emotion that attaches itself to that arousal is what you see. But arousal is physiological. Arousal is literally your alertness plus your heart rate, how much cortisol and adrenaline are in your system. How dysregulated is your brainstem and endocrinology? It is purely physiological, and that needs to be addressed first. Because often they'll say about children like this, he goes from 0 to 110 seconds. Then they also say, sometimes he just goes from being really happy to suddenly being really angry and destructive.
They're both very high emotions.
So they're working with the idea that, oh, just keep him happy
Yeah.
and help him to learn with anger. But actually, that's not what's happening. When arousal's very low, that's when you're asleep. You can't think, of course, because you're sleepy, right? And you get up and, you say to people who want to talk to you, don't even talk to me till I've had my coffee.
Yeah.
And then you wake up a little bit and you've showered and you get in the car and you're ready for work. Now you're alert. That requires a level of physiological arousal. But if arousal gets too high, beyond hyperarousal, that's when you're in danger of not being able to make good decisions.
Mm.
Road rage incidents, is just a matter of cumulative arousal today. Arousal can also be the function of something good. If we were talking right now and you look down on your phone and you got a message from the whatever lottery you have there that says you've won millions and millions of euros, right? Guaranteed you will not know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now that's positive, but it's a function of arousal.
Physically, everything gets intensified.
Correct. There's all different types of arousal. Usually when you say that word, people joke and because they're used to talking about sexual arousal, which is just the same. It's just the same. There comes a point at which it's hard to do maths. And so what happens with children who are developmentally traumatized is the baseline that they're sleeping at is very high already.
Right.
So they're holding it together. It doesn't go from 0 to 100 because they don't know what 0 feels like. They mask 70 very cleverly to look like 0. Now they get any point of stimulus. They're playing with the ball, or there's a change of plan, or someone says, no, you can't have that thing you wanted. And they elevate and they hit that ceiling. Once you or I would hit that ceiling, now we're under threat. And it's no longer about the issue. Now it's about fighting to survive, or running, or dissociating and freezing. The first thing that we do is we put a whole lot of things in place for carers, teachers, anyone around this child to understand that they need constant regulation between any stimulating activity. So they're not missing out on playing, which is exciting. They're making sure that there are regulating breaks, for example.
Mm.
Then, and the secret is, this is the bit that we miss very easily. People usually employ regulating or co-regulating exercises when a child is dysregulated.
Ah, right.
Today, I spoke to some carers and I said, these are the regulating exercises that we've got now, and he enjoys them. We want to do them every day when he's calm.
Yeah.
Now, we're still going to regulate him when he's dysregulated, but actually, we're going to not be fooled by the smoke and mirrors around his arousal baseline, and we're going to regulate him when he's already looking calm. It doesn't mean you lose authority. It doesn't mean you don't stand your ground when you say no.
This is a fine balance to find, isn't it?
Yes, yes. I always say you can stand your ground with kindness
With understanding for their feelings, right?
That's right.
I think this is something that I struggled quite a bit when I did some work with young offenders. It was a fine balance for me to try and understand how to have that authority while at the same time understanding their position.
And you would have seen this, right? In some of them, you would have seen this high arousal.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Sometimes I'll get a referral and they'll have a list of triggers. It's very unlikely that they're actual triggers. They'll say to me, oh, they're triggered by being told no to something that they want. And I say, they're not triggered by that. It's just annoying for anyone to say no to any of us.
So anything that would kind of annoy you will get them to a very high state of fear.
That's correct. They're already up here. So it'll kind of annoy them too, but then they hit that roof.
Yeah.
That's different to traumatic triggers. This is always the first place to start before we can do any healing with regards to the relational stuff, the emotional stuff, the cognitive stuff, the self-perception. All of that has to rest on an internalized safety. Otherwise, what can you do? You can't achieve anything.
So you kind of deal with the physiological aspects first before you take them to a place where they feel safe enough to start to understand what is going on with them, how they feel, and how their behavior is correlated to their feeling. Is that correct?
Yes, that is about facilitating insight. So the way that we speak will assist someone to understand themselves over time or even realize what they're doing. A lot of times people say, why did you do that? They don't even know what they're doing, let alone why they did it.
Yeah,
I always say to people, just assume they don't know why. Even if they do, assume they don't, and you'll have a much richer conversation.
yeah.
And once you can start to think, it's like, okay, now we can go about the business of helping someone make sense of the world that they found themselves in. It might be very strange for them to now be in a safe world and being cared for
Hmm.
and treated like a worthy person. What is this alien world? This isn't right.
It's not familiar.
It might feel safe, but also unfamiliar. Whereas for me, the way I came into the world,
Hmm.
feeling safe is familiar. So we always want to return to the familiar and the safe. But what if those two things aren't the same?
Hmm.
It's a very difficult way to live.
Yeah.
And it's hard for someone like me, who's not a traumatized child, to actually see the world through their lens. It's hard. It took me a long time to realize that actually they're not seeing the world the same way as I am. Because for me, the safe and the familiar is the same. And I feel like I deserve safe, familiar care. And they don't. And in fact, they're unconsciously and actively constantly looking for proof sometimes that they're the opposite of worthy of care, that they're rejectable. Now, if you're looking for proof of rejectability,
Yeah.
that's going to impact on your behavior, because if you and I are getting along well right now and I have that negative kind of relational template, I might enjoy the fact that you're speaking to me and I'm getting attention and you're asking me questions. And after a while, this is really unfamiliar and weird. It's very confronting, because what does it say about the world I came into? And I could make it all normal, familiar, if I just get your rejection, which I could. Maybe I'd say something inappropriate. And then you say, I've had enough of this, and turn it off.
And there's the proof.
Yeah. And I'm just like, oh, I knew it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No one ever wants to listen to me anyway.
So they're constantly seeking evidence of the fact that the lived experience that they've had is in fact reality.
Yeah, and of course I'm generalizing a lot, but lots of relational trauma works in this way, and a lot of the work that we do with carers, with teachers, with parents is about understanding this, holding it, and actually responding in a different way, not being drawn into that script,
Right, yeah.
right? But instead actually drawing the child into a script of worthiness, of of love and care and value.
But you have to understand where it's coming from, right? To be able to not fall into that story that the child is taking you towards.
Even if you understand it, it's easy to fall in. This is
Mm.
why you need good colleagues and good supervisors and people to debrief with and go, hey, you realize what's going on? Huh. Oh, yeah, it is
All
too,
right,
right?
yeah. So you mentioned the exercises that takes the child from a middle state to a lower state when they're not very reactive. Can you give an example of an exercise like that?
Well, firstly, there's the environment outside of the exercises. Warm if it's winter. So having a cold house, it increases arousal state and your sense of threat.
Right.
Ensuring that children always have access to food. So not having any weird food discipline, like you didn't eat enough of your breakfast, so now you're not getting any snacks until dinner time or whatever, right? So we say to them, ensure that they've got some sustenance, that they've got enough absence of chaos. So periods of quiet and peace in the house. A lot of kids who are traumatized will also tend to dissociate. So they need ways of grounding and becoming mindful of the present. So that's about the way that we interact. There has to be genuine relationship. There has to be genuine kindness.
Mm.
You can have all of the best exercises and techniques in the world, but if you're a bit cold and not actually being really, truly warm and kind, it's not going to work, is it?
We're animals at the end of the day, and that kid is very sensitive.
Correct. Then outside of that, there are things that you can do that are regulating. Lots of things that are good are things done with an adult who is regulated, because someone in charge who is, for whatever reason, slightly destabilized or anxious will heighten that person. Imagine if you're a passenger on a plane and you look up at the flight attendant and the flight attendant is in tears,
You'd become terrified.
because you're probably going to die.
Yeah.
That's how I think of kids when they're around us. We're like the flight attendants.
Yeah.
People say, what, do I have to fake it? I'm like, in a way, yes. In a way, you've got to ensure that you keep that emotional hygiene for the sake of the child and have a way that you're able to express it outside of that zone. And sometimes you can't, but you do what you can. With developmental trauma, whether you're working with children or adults, or whether it's yourself, with regards to, regulation, look at what babies need.
Hmm.
That's what a person who's developmentally traumatized needs. What happens when a baby becomes aroused? They start crying, right? They vocalize uncontrollably sometimes, but before they lose control, we tend to detect it. And the first thing you do is you pick the baby up. So they require this containment, this feeling of safety.
Yeah.
They need a regulated parent close by. So that's the other clue that we just spoke about. When a baby's crying and an adult is holding them and he's not moving, it looks weird. It doesn't matter what culture and what country you're in. The human mammal does this regardless of where you are in the world. We tend to, we have this rhythm and then we add beats here and we add rhythms. There's
Yeah.
something about that rocking that gives a message to the baby that you're safe. I'm not suggesting that, we pick up a dysregulated 16-year-old and rock them, or a 40-year-old even, but we can actually simulate rhythm and closeness and stability. I've had tough 15-year-old boys sitting in a swing at the park, and I'm just gently giving them a bit of a push. They sit in the swing and complain and tell me they're not babies, but they're still doing it, right? Or anything that's rhythmic, walking with, and if they rush off, you don't pick up the pace, you slow it down. I've had, teenagers who are into boxing and they've been dangerous before. So you've got some department person who says, oh, no, they're not allowed to do boxing because, they punch people and now they're going to punch people, but we're really good form. That's not how it works. They punch people because they lost control. So you take that kid to a boxing gym and tell the coach about what this is. But even if you don't, most boxing coaches are actually quite regulated people. They'll ask the kid to come in, get on a skipping rope and do all this rhythmic stuff with music going, and then they'll hold up pads. And it's quite dietic because the coach is controlling the pace and says, ready, jab, 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 cross, jab, cross, hook, jab, cross, hook. And this is the way that it'll go. They'll create this rhythm with a regulated adult, finish off, feel good about themselves.
Mm.
I sometimes will say, well, can we get a rocking chair? And even better than a rocking chair is 2 rocking chairs, one for the adult and one for the child beside you. And now you're rocking the baby. You can get really creative with the idea of a regulated person or a symbol of a regulated person, something that symbolizes that, and rhythmic movement that regulates the brainstem. But you don't wait until they're out of control and then say, come on, get in the rocking chair, because it's going
Yeah,
to be,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you do it on a regular basis to increase their capacity.
That's beautiful. For families that are in difficult situations, unprivileged positions, and they know that the child is going to be in environments of danger or not feel safe out of the parents' control, for example, because the neighborhood is not safe, because the schooling system doesn't feel safe for the child. You have just answered this question, but how do we then create that safety in the home? It's looking at the safety as well of the parent, right? The parent working on their groundedness.
I'd say that's the most important thing. The reason why little children, babies, are traumatized in war zones is not because of the actual war stuff. It's because of the inadvertent neglect that happens because mother needs to make sure that everyone's going to survive this, and she needs to think of other stuff. She's heightened, and of course for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
So what matters if the neighborhood isn't safe and all that is the safety in the home. That is what matters the most. That's what's going to give that little person the capacity as they grow to be able to think and to manage things and to know who's safe and who's not safe. The efforts that parents take for themselves and their own regulation and look after themselves is actually really important. It's not selfish to look after yourself because, you've got to look after these little people. That would be the starting point.
And Mary herself needed to be regulated to be able to support you in your journey, as you are now regulated, supporting children in their journey of healing.
She passed away some many years ago, but she was still possibly the most regulated person on the planet.
Mm,
She
yeah.
spoke almost in a whisper. Her eyes were always shut because she was blind. And, she always had this calmness about her. And she was tiny. At 16, I was twice her size. And she called me little one.
That's so endearing.
That was really funny. I just felt such a sense of, just relax when I was around her. And I think that that was important for me. But also, I had a baseline
Yeah.
reasonably average. This is where sometimes, people will say with kids who are really traumatized, we just need to teach them meditation, things like that. Well, we can, but quite often it's a matter of not yet. As you might be aware with meditation, you've got to sit still before you get there and usually listen to some instructions. Already that's too much.
Yeah.
What we need to do is we need to lower the arousal enough so that then they're able to go through those instructions of relaxation. And you do that through those certain activities, rhythmic activities, having a regulated environment. So all that would be useful, but we've got to get there, not have someone feel like they fail. Oh, I can't even do that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Even sit still, I fail at everything, and of course that affirms all the relational stuff. So it's a trick. But even sometimes we will have young people referred to us for counselling with a psychologist. And sometimes our advice will be, we think this is a great idea. and let's aim for it, perhaps in a year's time. In the meantime, we'd rather do the sessions with you, right? Until we get there. We give kids a chance, and that way they don't feel like they're failing at therapy, which is actually quite often how they can feel.
It's a long road, but I guess it probably brings you a lot of fulfillment.
It's kind of corny when people say, oh, does it feel like you make a difference and it must be rewarding? And you know what? I've got no qualm saying it does. It is rewarding. It is. I love it. And I've been doing it a long time. And, I hardly ever take a break, take a holiday,
Yeah.
My wife wishes that I would take more holidays, but I do love it and do have such great support. And of course, I have her support, every day that keeps me regulated so that I'm able to do the work. There's all this network of stuff. We shouldn't be thinking about corrections and justice. We should be thinking about healing. And it's quite confronting at first when you learn something new. It's like, you mean I've been wrong about something?
Yes.
It's confronting to learn new stuff, isn't it, too?
And it's difficult for people to change their mindset over something.
It's hard, but something that I've learned is that every time I feel embarrassed that I was wrong, I get smarter.
Yeah.
And it's actually a good feeling.
Amazing. I mean, the time has gone so quickly. It's crazy. I have
Oh, it
still
has. Gosh,
so many questions to ask you. We're going to have to do this again.
we can have another chat.
That sounds great.
You got stories out of me that I haven't told before.
I feel very honored to listen to those stories and yeah, very honored to have this conversation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's been amazing to learn so much. And as someone who, yes, had a little bit of experience with working with kids who had trauma, it's so important to understand with clarity the practicalities of how to help someone.
Yes, that's right. It's like we call it complex trauma, but that doesn't mean complicated.
Yeah. So I usually have three questions at the end. The first one is, what are you grateful for today?
Today, I feel especially grateful for my wife, I think, because I'm away from her as I'm traveling, working, and whenever I'm away from her, I'm grateful for everything that she does,
Yeah.
um, and who she is. So, yes, I definitely can say that.
The people in our lives are very important, isn't it? Connection is so important, and your work has shown that so clearly.
Thank you. Yes, I think so too. I think it does matter who we've got around us.
Yeah.
We can't take all the credit ourselves.
No, no, we can't. No.
Mm.
Our ego would like to, but we shouldn't.
I know, my ego would love to take all the credit.
Yeah.
There are so many people, behind everything. Every time you learn from someone. So many great people I've worked with over the years. So,
Yeah.
mm.
Do you have a book that you would recommend to the listeners?
I wrote a book of short stories back in 2013, but I must be almost out of print. Gosh, I'll have to check. It's called How to Tuck a Gangster into Bed.
Double check because I would love to read it.
I'll send you one.
Oh, amazing.
I'll send you one. And I would read anything by Bruce Perry. Bessel van der Kolk's the Body Keeps a Score.
Yeah.
For the real nerdy types out there, I would suggest to just hit Google Scholar and put all the different combinations of the words associated with developmental trauma, because that's where the gold is.
Yeah, amazing. And the last question is, how can people find you if they want to work with you?
You can always look me up on LinkedIn, I guess so, as some of the kids call it corporate Facebook.
Yeah.
I've just created a new Instagram account, which is just my name, or you can email me on stephanf@knightlamp.com. And just leave a link to the Knightlamp website and you can get in touch with me there.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much, Isabel. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Have a safe drive tomorrow, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Isabel.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. All the links are written down on the show notes, as well as resources for anyone struggling with their mental health. Don't forget to subscribe so you're notified when we release new episodes. Also, feel free to share our podcast with your friends and family. And if you'd like to get involved, explore our content, or support our work, visit our website www.yourlight.earth. That's YOUR-light.earth. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at u.r.light. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.